But when you're elected president in this country, like it or not, you're running for re-election the day you get into office. And part of this job is being out there and looking and sounding and acting presidential every opportunity you get. It's not just about moving the big pieces of legislation through Congress.
I agree. I mean, the counter I would offer to that is, he is a human being like the rest of us. He has, 24 hours in the day like the rest of us. And there are so many things that are demanding his time. These big bills that he's launched into Congress, everything from immigration to health care to the economy and the stimulus bills, and then he's ended the war in Iraq. There's a lot going on his plate. You add to that all the frustration around the country. You add to that all the Tea Partiers. You add to that these local elections and what's happening. Where do you begin to give yourself the time to reconnect with people? I agree with you, though. It is fundamentally it's going to be the largest challenge he faces in the re-election, and it is a shame because he started with this capital. It's not as if he had to build it up. He built it up already. It was a well-oiled machine, as you said. It was working fine for him. I just think that he's got 2 years left to make a big impact, and it starts with these local elections. And if he doesn't start participating in them or making his presence more known, the Democrats are going to have a really uphill battle for his own re-election in 2 years.
Well, it's almost too little too late, in my view. But, yes, I agree with you. He is a human being. There are only 24 hours a day, but that's no excuse. Look at President Bush. He had to deal with September 11th just a year after getting into office. And imagine the immense pressure he felt at that time. And he, as a human being, only had 24 hours a day. But at the same time, he had people behind him. And I think that's the bigger story here. He had the right people behind him they always had an eye on re-election, at least, and they always had an eye on what they should be doing as an administration to get re-elected and get put back into office. And there is that missing element here, in my view, in the Obama administration, in that they don't have that supreme organizer like Karl Rove or that
he is missing
mastermind.
Sort of a strong second. And I think, Hillary Clinton is a terrific strong second, but she's out handling everything else while he's concentrating on these core matters. And you're right, there's not a central figure that's emerged in his administration yet that is sort of the strong center. While President Obama is out doing his thing. I think that is symptomatic of the entire Democratic Party now, not just the Republican Party, is that you don't have the leadership there anymore that's compelling. And we talk about it all the time, Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi, not the world's most inspiring creatures from the Democratic front. And then you have a similar thing with the Republican Party where you have a bunch of polarized figures, but no one person that's emerged to really try and tap into that independent sentiment, which most of us feel. Well, another race that got a lot of attention here locally in Washington, D.C., and of course across the country, too, is the mayoral race for Washington, D.C., between Mayor Adrian Fenty and Chairman Vincent Gray. This was one that really divided up the city. And, the Post did an article on the election. It was very interesting what they said. They said, Mayor Fenty started out with this fabulous base appeal, and then he lost it basically over time by becoming inaccessible to his own council and then eventually to the city, where people started to basically say he's too arrogant to come and talk with us. But it turns out that Mayor Fenty, also felt a sense of betrayal around town, that, people were trying to ask him to reinvent himself. And I think, there's an opportunity there that he should have listened to, which was that the people were asking for him to come back and speak to them one-on-one and connect with them. And rather than being defensive on that, I think he should have just reached back out to the community and said, well, you know what? They're asking to hear from me, so let me just offer myself up to my people. And, we will always look back at this election and wonder how much of that was a factor in the outcome.
And welcome to politics. I said it before, but you're running for re-election the minute you get into office. So, that's a great example of that playing out right there. Another issue that I'd like to talk about that's going to be drastically impacted by the midterm elections is the number of vacancies in the judiciary right now on the federal bench. President Bush, during the time he was in office, actually had an opportunity to appoint almost 1/3 of the sitting judges in the federal judiciary, and that is a huge, staggering number. President Obama, if you contrast, has approximately 1 in 8 judicial positions as vacant right now during President Obama's administration. Yet he has appointed fewer judges to the bench than any sitting president since Richard Nixon. And if his administration thought it was difficult to get nominees through during the first 2 years of his presidency, what do you think the next 2 years is going to look like when perhaps the makeup and the shift in Congress is going to change? After all, he had the House and he had the Senate in his court, so to speak. So why is it that we had fewer judges being appointed than any president in the last 30 years? I can't figure this out.
Well, you did have Judge Sotomayor. I mean, she was appointed to the Supreme Court, which is the highest court of the land. So, I mean, one can argue that he has made his mark already. But I agree with you. Again, so few cases make it to the Supreme Court to have that kind of impact. It, again, comes back to what's happening on the local front. These positions are in courts that are around the country at a local level. So, again, if he's not appointing people there, he's not going to help build that grassroots level base that he's going to need in just a couple of years. I wonder why that is. I mean, granted, everybody makes a point that anytime a new administration comes in, it's like change of house, right? They take out all of the roles and positions and they bring in their own people. I wonder if he did that as a calculated move not to be disruptive at a time when the country was in turmoil, or if he really just seriously underestimated having the depth of people to reach out to fill these type of roles.
Well, I don't think this was a calculated move at all. You can't simply ignore that number of judicial vacancies and not fill them just for the reason that you don't want to create too much turmoil.
But why does it matter so much?
Why does it matter? Because these are the judges that hear cases at a level far below the Supreme Court. And as you said, very few cases actually reach the level of the Supreme Court. So these are more the day-to-day decisions that affect people's lives. The very issues that Obama said were critical, that were important to him in choosing a Supreme Court justice. He wanted to make sure that whoever he chose always had that in mind, that these decisions affect your everyday life. So it doesn't make sense to me that you wouldn't pay attention. I think that what happened was the administration was a little bit asleep at the wheel. They were concerned about these Supreme Court vacancies, which they had to fill, but they ignored these other judicial vacancies that were at the lower courts. And so there was a slow process to get them nominated and named and sent to the committee. You couple that with what the Republicans were doing. They were using these arcane filibuster procedures to slow down the judicial nomination process, which they claim the Democrats invented way back when. So, but the Democrats, they had the majority. They could have unified and they could have spent some capital and they could have gotten around these, but they didn't do that either. So it's been a combination.
The problem is that there's not enough unification on the Democratic side of the House to really help push things through. You have people that are out of alignment with the president's own policies. And some of them don't even want the president coming to their area to try to show that they're in alignment.